your journey so far, what have been the key challenges that you faced? Well, you want to set the tone and then we'll go on to the others.
I think I'll keep it really brief. It's an honor again to be on this plenary and to have all the amazing people here. People first, leaders next, and change makers third. Joining us in this space here and also virtually. So thank you so much. I think the very basic thing, and I'll just wrap it up in 3 sentences as a brief context setting. What has been the main challenge? The main challenge as I presented this morning is really to see people with disabilities as full human beings. The minute you see someone as a full human being, you're thinking about, okay, so what are their basic rights? The minute you don't see them as human beings, you're not thinking about what are their basic rights. So the world can move on to say access to technology. The world can move on to say education is a right. The world can move on to say we are contributing to the economy, and you will still have a segregated space where you are having people who you don't see as full human beings. So I think the biggest challenge is that shift, that social shift, that mindset shift, and then that shift getting translated into policy, law, infrastructure, action, and budgetary commitment. And I think really keeping all of these parameters is extremely important to think about then inclusive economies. How would economies even get inclusive when you have people living with diversities at the table? In 2011 or 13, I'm now confusing 2 years, the concept of purple economy was formed, right? And they have defined it as thinking about economic growth and globalization, accounting for diversity, the human diversity, and then thinking of economic development and globalization. It was then, we're more than 10 years from there, but we're still thinking like purple economy is a new concept, and we want to achieve that. But it's really there, human diversity is there. What it takes is to acknowledge, recognize, and then to commit to bringing this diversity.
That the Persons with Disabilities, Equal Opportunities, Protection of Rights and Participation Act was only enforced in India in 1996. So it's barely been 20 years, and it's barely been 30 years, and clearly there is so much more work that needs to be done. I'd like to go across to you, Raj. When it comes to workplace inclusion, if you can explain to us, what does it really mean? Also, there are certain disabilities that you can see, and there are certain that you cannot see. So how do you factor those in?
Many of you in the room may think at this point, many of you in the room may think that my workplace is not like that. We treat everyone equally. And to this I have to say that when the environment, when our social context, when our cultural context throws up barriers, you cannot be treating people equally because your workplace is built for the default. Forget the conversations we've been having on BNI here. There are many workplaces in India today that don't have bathrooms for women, right? So now I'll focus a little bit on invisible disabilities and what are these. So they are called invisible disabilities because they are hidden or they are not immediately apparent, and they can range across a variety of mental, physical, neurological conditions. Could be chronic illness, it could be mental illness, it could be renal failure even, blood disorders, autism, etc. Now in terms of numbers, we heard about how many disabled people we are in the world. Estimates range that 50 to 60% of disabilities are invisible. Even if I take a subset of that, the number of people who live in India with a mental health condition, 60 million. So now let's talk about workplace inclusion. Get BNI into this conversation. And we've made a beginning in this, but everyone knows that we've not gone too far beyond ramps and accessible bathrooms, and that's for whether you're disabled or queer trans, right? So if we have to ask ourselves, what does inclusion and safety in an organization mean for those with invisible disabilities? What would you have to do? I think some first thoughts could be, maybe we should include this in hiring, we should be very intentional about putting it into a JD. But even before we get to that stage, let me tell you that most people with invisible disabilities report that they have to perform immense emotional labor to avoid telling others about their condition. And if they've already disclosed about their condition, they may live in fear of other people finding out, they may live in fear of consequences. And why is that? You may wonder, what's the big deal in talking about this? The big deal is that this type of visibility without protection is a trap. And so in this case, censoring is an act of safety, it's an act of self-preservation. And along with it comes hypervigilance, it comes scrutiny, it comes surveillance, because you will have to disclose, or you may have to disclose to make your disability apparent. And that tells us a couple of things, that fitting in your work environment involves more than just being able to do your job from a technical perspective, right? Your supervisors are looking for people who can fit in. Are fun Fridays easy to do for people with autism? Are socials easy to do for people with autism? No, right? And so what do we do in this case? What helps with disclosure? What helps with safety? One is a reasonable accommodation policy. I'm going to keep this policy or suggestion heavy so that we can start working on this stuff. Reasonable accommodation, which is written about in the UNCRPD and in many other places. But remember when I said that visibility without protection is a trap? Any reasonable accommodation policy, any affirmative hiring work must come alongside a grievance policy. Okay? And this, whether it's reasonable accommodations, whether it's a grievance policy, it must include the voices of those who are affected. So when you are drafting these, you must have persons with disabilities drafting them with you, alongside you. Not to mention, of course, your managers, your leaders. This is not an HR problem. This is an ecosystem problem. It's a sector problem. It's an organization problem, all three levels. And to do that, you need leadership and you need people who are most affected, as well as HR, but also across whatever verticals you have in your organization. Right? So what needs to change within organizations? One is at multiple levels of leadership. You must be confident that if you are disclosed, you will be able to be considered for a raise or a promotion. These are very real concerns that people with invisible disabilities have. You must be confident that whatever you share, with whomever you choose to share it, is confidential or is spoken about in the way that you'd like to be spoken about it. And this is not just for invisible disabilities, it is for sexuality, it is for gender, it is for the range of marginalizations. Because remember, you have to tailor things differently if you want to treat everyone equally, because the playing ground is different, right? And so, how much time do I have? I know someone is supposed to. Okay. So, I want to say that, companies, it's very important to get all of this down as processes, as written codes, simply because companies may be willing to accommodate the needs of their star performers, but you have to make your policy and this sort of a systems improvement is important for everyone, and it just does not just help persons with disabilities. There are some examples. Let's take our typical work-leave policies, what are they designed for? They're designed for acute short-term illnesses with pretty clear ideas of when they come back to work. What happens to those with chronic conditions? What happens to those who have a flare-up, who don't know when they'll be in remission, right? And it's a pretty easy policy to work on and solve, so that you cover everyone rather than just covering your very short-term normative idea of illness. So, and how much time do you have?
Hopefully come back to you. Alright, no, you could have gone on, but since, you want to make a point, you want to finish the point, please continue.
Okay. I'll just end by saying fairness and doing inclusion properly requires dismantling ableism and dispelling myths, false assumptions, and education for everyone on the systemic nature of ableism and the solutions required to engage with it is needed.
Policies at the workplace.
Honestly, hi, okay. Honestly, I really don't know how to even go after Raj because that was just fabulous, Raj. I think to answer your question, Raj has actually answered a lot of the questions because if you look at the policy that Raj was talking about, it sort of encompasses pretty much everything that you've asked me. I just wanna. It's very difficult for me to tell other businesses or government or anybody to do what they should be doing. It just is the right thing to do. However, for me and for our company, what we realize is that D&I and diversity, equity and inclusion has to be a part of the DNA of the company. It has to be from top down in every aspect of the company. It needs to be seen. It needs to be seen, it needs to be in your face, and it needs to be talked about in every meeting, morning meeting, business meeting, evening meeting. It has to be just talked about. And I think the only sort of recommendation, other than what Raj has said, because Raj has sort of articulated it perfectly for all companies as well as the other intersections, is that companies should also not, and this is mainly for companies, that they should not think that they're doing a CSR activity, and they also should not think that they are saving anybody, because the savior complex comes very easy when you go into D&I. And I think that's the biggest lesson, is that we're not saving anybody. We're just doing the right thing. We're building an empathetic organization for an empathetic country and a world. Thank you.
Ronnie here. Ronnie, if you could give us some best practices, udharan of inclusion in governance and political participation in Brazil.
Meu nome é Rony e vou me autodescrever. Eu estou com uma camisa azul, uma calça jeans azul e com tênis preto. Também estou usando uma sobreposição, uma camisa com plantas da cor preta. Bom, eu sou um rapaz negro e tenho deficiência intelectual. Tenho 34 anos e trabalho no time do Advocacy, do Instituto João Clemente.
Hello everyone, my name is Ronnie and I'll describe myself. I'm a black person with intellectual disability.
Private councils of rights. Rights councils are spaces for articulation and monitoring of public policies. Are spaces that allows for the participation of civil society organizations, public authorities, and persons with disabilities. The councillors are elected. These councils point out priorities in policies for persons with disabilities. Meetings are monthly, and there are also specific meetings on specific areas like health, education, accessibility, among others.
Promovemos a participação.
plantões de atendimento aos moradores da cidade de São Paulo. O objetivo dos plantões é orientar pessoas com deficiência e famílias sobre os seus direitos. O diferencial: pessoas com deficiência intelectual, como eu e o Lucas, autodefensor, somos responsáveis pela pasta da educação e atendemos diretamente as pessoas com dificuldades no seu dia a dia. Exemplo: uma pessoa com deficiência sem recurso e acessibilidade nas escolas da cidade.
We serve the residents of the city of São Paulo. The purpose of this service is to guide people with disabilities and their families about their rights. The peculiarity: people with intellectual disabilities like me and Lucas, we are responsible for the education portfolio and we serve people with difficulties in their daily lives. For example, a person with a disability without resources and the issue of accessibility in
Importante dizer que às vezes é necessário repetir mais de uma vez a fala, até que a pessoa compreenda. Nós solicitamos que a equipe do Conselho cada vez mais utilize materiais em linguagem acessível, como por exemplo, a apresentação em lâminas, com imagens e, quando for necessário, vídeos acessíveis.
Of what is being said at the meeting. Self-advocates request that the speech be repeated again in plain language. It is important to say that sometimes it's necessary to repeat the speech once again until the person understands. We request that the council team increasingly use materials in accessible language, such as slides, images, and when necessary, accessible videos and sentences with short paragraphs.
Que também se beneficiam das medidas adotadas para permitir a participação de pessoas com deficiência intelectual, contribuindo para tornar os conselhos municipais em espaços acessíveis e inclusivos. Uma mudança muito importante que eu quero dividir com vocês é que esse espaço político das pessoas com deficiência intelectual antes era ocupado apenas por familiares. E desde 2015, com a participação dos autodefensores no processo eleitoral, essa representatividade passou a ser da própria pessoa com deficiência intelectual.
We promote change. Our presence on the council has deeply contributed to improving the quality of the meetings and the general participation of other councillors, who also benefit from the measures adopted to allow the participation of people with intellectual disabilities, contributing to make the municipal council accessible and inclusive spaces. An important change that I want to share with you is that this political space for people with intellectual disabilities was previously only occupied by family members. Since 2015, with the participation of self-advocates in the electoral process, this representation has become of the persons with intellectual disability.
But still I would like to give a background, like persons with impairments, because of the various barriers, like barriers in the environment, lack of support services, and lack of assistive devices and so on, are restricted from participating on an equal basis with others. So we become a person with disability, and the lack of this results in multidimensional poverty, including lack of education, employment, resulting in poverty, exclusion, and further marginalization. So, next slide please. So how do we move from exclusion to inclusion? There are various measures that is required, which includes removing the barriers like infrastructural barriers, information barriers, and so on, and ensuring universal design, ensuring support services, which is specific and general, assistive devices, rehabilitation services. And in this slew of services and removal of barriers, we look at social protection as an enabler, equalizer. So when we say social protection, why is it important? Isn't it there for everybody? So it's to move away from one size fits all, and also because of the systemic marginalization that we have been experiencing for over a period of time, like we lack jobs, and we, during emergencies, the risk of losing our lives or income is high compared to a person without disability. And we have extra cost of living with disability because of the barriers and also because of the specific needs that we have as persons with disabilities. And more often we are in poverty and we couldn't move beyond the vicious cycle of poverty. We experience sickness compared to other persons with disabilities, and the need for support, the support that is required, like personal assistance services, care services, nursing assistance across life cycle, makes it important to have a social protection package to be an equalizer. So what should be the goal of social protection for us is to ensure adequate standard of living for all persons with disabilities and their families, and moving beyond economic security to ensure an economic floor that allows for full and effective participation of all